Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sheriff's Mic. I'm Sheriff Corey Honea, and I've gotten a lot of requests to address the issue of homelessness in Butte County and in California in particular. And so today I am really pleased to have somebody who I think is on the front lines of this issue in our community. It is Amber Abney-Bass, who's the executive director of the Jesus Center located here in Chico. And the Jesus Center actually operates our pallet shelter, right?
That's correct.
That's correct. So welcome and thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on our show.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
I was when I was thinking about who I could have come on this podcast to talk about this particular topic. I went through and thought about a lot of different people, but you rose to the top because I think you hold a unique place in our community and probably have a unique perspective of all the people. I think you're kind of on the front lines of it. You see it every day. But I think you have a balanced viewpoint, and that's what I ultimately wanted to bring to this. I was also pretty happy when I sent you a text message and started explaining to you that I have a podcast. You said that you were I think, long-time listener, which I think was funny, given the fact that it's a relatively new. So I appreciate you being a
long-time listener, first-time attender.
Exactly, first-time guest.
Yeah,
exactly right. Fantastic. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
So I think for those people who may be watching this episode who aren't familiar with you and familiar with the work that you do at the Jesus Center, let's just start off a little bit with how long have you been affiliated with the Jesus Center?
Yes, thank you. I came to the Jesus Center in 2014.
Okay.
And so I've had a really good opportunity to see sort of how homelessness has evolved, the complexity has changed, the volume of people experiencing homelessness, particularly in our community, and just some of the other things that I think has probably had an influence. And some of those things positive and some of those things, otherwise.
Yeah.
And so I think it gives me a good perspective. So this is my 12th year at the Jesus Center.
Wow. So that is over a decade now of dealing with this issue here in our community. What got you into this particular line of work?
This is always an interesting question that people ask me because they say, wow, how do you feel called to something that is controversial, that is political, that is difficult?
Yeah.
I mean, providing services for people who are experiencing homelessness means that you not only get to see the impact and hear the concerns and the frustrations of people in our community, but you are often some of the most proximate to people's trauma and some really horrible experiences that they have faced in their life. And I think the balance of that is that we also get to be there to celebrate with them.
For sure.
We get to see change. We get to see how some of the efforts that we put in, the work that we do, just really does change people's lives. And I think that with that, we get to share that, that there is another side of this for many people in our community. And I think that we need that. I think that in times where our community feels frustrated or is suffering, they need to know that the work we're doing does make lives better. And I really appreciate, I think it's a real honor to be able to walk through some of these things with people. It's funny because I actually didn't apply for this job at the Jesus Center. They
grabbed you off the street and forced you to do it?
They just said you.
Okay.
So I had a background in business development, and I came from real estate. And it's funny, the other day I was talking through this with somebody, and I just sort of said, one of the things that I've always really loved in my life is kind of putting together this puzzle of what somebody is looking for and how I can find it, and kind of putting those two pieces together and really help people to understand that maybe what they want is not necessarily what they need, but what the next best thing could be for them. And in a lot of ways, that's really what real estate is, right? And so I was still working in the real estate industry, and the Jesus Center had a need to create a really fundraising focused position. And so that was the development director at the Jesus Center. And the Chico real estate division had an executive by the name of Peggy Mead.
Okay.
And so she came to me, she was on the board of the Jesus Center at the time, and said, hey, I want to talk to you about this. I think this could be a really good fit. And then I think the other piece of this that I bring is just my background. I grew up, my mom was somebody who suffered from alcoholism and substance use. She also had an undiagnosed mental health disorder. And so, I grew up in a very dysfunctional, abusive, traumatic household when I was young.
Yeah.
And I think that it's been really important to me in my life, particularly for children born into these circumstances, for them to know that you're not stuck there. You have opportunity. And I also really valued what has been just a critical part of my personal success is the people who stepped into that void when my mom was unable or unwilling to provide some of the supports that, parents typically provide.
Yeah.
And so this is just a way in which I can continue to do that for people. And I say this all the time. Rarely a week goes by that I don't see somebody like my mom getting services from the Jesus Center. And sometimes I see people like my mom who get services, who take them up and who have incredible changes in their life. And I say, wow, I wonder what could have been different.
Sure.
If people could have reached my mom.
Yeah.
And it was not a lack of effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's two things that you said there that I think during the course of our conversation, I hope that we can revisit and touch upon. And one of them is the success stories. And I think that's kind of a critical piece because people are frustrated. They're frustrated with what's going on in our community. And I think that there is this perception that's developed that people who are homeless or on the streets are there in perpetuity, and that a lot of effort and time and money is being wasted to perpetuate a problem. So I'm glad to hear that there are success stories, and I'd love to highlight that. The other thing that resonates with that is this intersection between homelessness and mental health.
Yeah.
And drug addiction, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. As sheriff, I get asked this question a lot because there is an intersection between homelessness and drug addiction and criminal justice. It all kind of morphs together at some point, right?
Yeah.
I had an encounter with somebody not too long ago while I was working out of the gym, and in between sets, they wanted to ask me why there were so many homeless people in Chico. And my reaction was, how do you expect me to answer that? I mean, this is such a complex problem, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
But I'm going to ask you, why are there so many homeless people in California? I think we talked about over half of the nation's homeless population is in California. And it seems like, at least if you're living in Butte County and Chico, and you've lived here for many years, you've definitely seen what appears to be a substantial increase in the homeless population. So I'm going to throw that question at you like it was thrown at me and see what you do with it.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is I think a lot of people instinctually want to say a lack of housing or a lack of affordable housing. I hear that a lot, and I think my struggle with using that as the response to that question is I firmly believe that even if we had the housing, that some of the challenges that you just mentioned, the mental health, the substance use disorder, the alcoholism, some of these other issues, I think we would have a very difficult time keeping people housed, right? And that's really what we need to do. We need to be able to address the fact that we've had some criminal justice changes that have led to this. Mm-hmm. We've had a tremendous number of policy changes that have contributed to this. I'll tell you a story. My husband and I were back in Georgia at one of the boys' graduations from basic training. Mm-hmm. And our server at our hotel was like, "Oh, you're from California, man, I want to go out there. You guys can do anything out there. It's like the frontier, you know." And I remember we just sort of took that in for a second and thought, what an interesting perspective that there are people across the country that could perceive California as sort of this Wild West where everything is back on the table again to be able to do. And I think that, you know, some of the changes that started with, you know, some of the recreational marijuana use, and I know that might not be things that people initially resonate with, but I feel like what we see in people and the struggles that they have could be tied back to things as early as that. Then the decriminalization of some of the drugs. I mean, we all are pretty familiar with that documentary, Seattle is Dying.
Mm-hmm.
We saw the impacts of what other states and communities have tried to do. And some of that, those folks, when changes are made and restrictions are made in other areas, but we're sort of going in a bit of a different direction, I think that creates, sort of an allure to come to California.
Sure.
And then I think sort of from the federal level, we've had these changes like housing first practices. And I think that there is good in the concept of housing first and this idea that we have an opportunity to meet people where they are, because I think drug addiction, I think that, alcoholism, mental health, I think there's some real opportunity to meet people where they are. But one of the unintended consequences of housing first practices is sort of this idea that you just leave them there.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't help them get to a different or a better place. And the result of that is that people don't experience any discomfort, which means they don't have any incentive. And this was a really big part of our move in our incredible change of all of our programs at the Jesus Center when we moved off of Park Avenue and went to Fair Street, is this idea that people are not supposed to be coming to the Jesus Center for 10 years to get a meal, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be there helping to do deep, effective change. And I think that, again, this lack of discomfort, this idea that I am okay to stay in this state that I am in public spaces and whatnot, that is confusing for an incredibly unhealthy group of people.
Yeah. Holy crap, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So I love that you hit on some of the things that I really wanted to talk about. And let's start with this. You talked about some of the public policy changes that have contributed to what we're seeing here in California. And certainly that could attribute to the fact that other states haven't experimented with the same kind of public policy changes that California has, or have gone as far as California has. So that could certainly contribute to why we're seeing increased numbers in California, and in particular, in our community as well. We were talking before the podcast, and I told you I'm reading a book called Deadly Consequences, and I'm actually going to do a podcast on that. But one of the things that was interesting to me is the authors of that particular book traced the evolution of this problem back to the 1960s with the movement to deinstitutionalize people who were in mental hospitals. And what it essentially did was, there was supposed to be services for them in the community, but they didn't invest in the services in the community. And so what it resulted into, it was this trans-institutional effect of they moved from hospitals into local jails.
Yeah.
And now, over the last decade or so, right, we've seen where the passage of AB 109, where the state shifted responsibility to the counties to deal with a certain population of convicted felons, forced people who were misdemeanants out onto the streets, right? Yep. We saw Proposition 47, which in essence it took away any of the negative consequences associated with using drugs, right?
That's right.
We took the stick away from that, right?
Yeah.
You talk about there's no consequences, there's no discomfort, and we didn't invest in that, and I see that continuing to happen. As a matter of fact, one of the things I'm kind of concerned about is there's an effort on the part of the state of California to shift responsibilities for dealing with people who are in state hospitals back to the counties, and I think that's going to contribute to our problem. But this intersection between mental illness and a lack of services in the community and drug addiction and a lack of consequences, it sounds to me like you're seeing the impact of that every day in the population you serve. Is that an accurate statement?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think also the evolution of the drugs that people are struggling with, right?
Okay.
I would say that when I joined the Jesus Center in 2014, it was well before, fentanyl,
Yeah.
obviously,
Right.
right? And I think the other thing is that some of the things that people were still using at that time were not yet in a place where they were life altering, right? Initially, drugs are mood altering or behavior altering, but now we're really dealing with folks that are taking drugs, and the consequence of that is that it is just life altering. They're not able to even recognize that they desperately need help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that as well. And when I had, the director of behavioral health on and talked about the formulation of methamphetamine today versus, 30 years ago when I worked the streets, it almost in some cases can cause this psychosis, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, fentanyl and the deadly consequences of that, we see people who will use fentanyl, overdose, be saved by, Narcan, and they'll go right back to using fentanyl that same day, right?
Yeah.
So the drive to do that is pretty compelling if you're willing to risk death twice within the same day, right?
Yeah, and we just had a presentation from public health at a recent all-staff meeting, and we were really talking about this, and we were talking about the impacts on helpers, right? When they have people, out at Genesis and that low barrier environment, my staff really struggle with this.
Okay.
They struggle with the idea that, there are some folks out there that do exactly what you just described. And most often what they're saying to me is, how do we make this stop?
Right.
How do we end this cycle for people? And it's a question that I don't have an answer to. And I think one of the interesting things about the availability of Narcan is that, the drug use has not gone down amongst this population.
Correct.
Just the deaths as a result of the use have gone down, right?
Right.
And often the overdose occurrences are incredibly underreported because they don't all make it to the hospital. They don't all make it into those reports. And so my staff is often, some of the first people that are trying to navigate that and trying to keep people, staff engaged, try to support them, through the vicarious trauma of being around a population that is just, self-harming in a way that even a near-death experience isn't enough for them to change. And I think what's interesting about that is I'm a little bit better equipped to support them because of my experience with my own mother.
Okay.
And I think that this is really where the community can struggle with this idea that people need to hit rock bottom before they're going to make change.
Okay.
We cannot expedite this process for people.
Okay. Right.
And that there's some frustration in that.
Sure.
There's frustration from the community. There's also frustration from family members, right? This idea of, and I'm sure I'm not alone at this. I'll drive down the street and I'll see people on the corner, and sometimes, during that red light, I'm like, where is their family?
Yeah.
And then I stop and I say, whew, I've been that family.
Yeah.
I watched my grandparents as their only daughter was just spiraling into self-destruction. And I think that there's a lot of elements of, drug problems, of mental health, that it takes a lot of time and a lot of people. And unfortunately, overdosing, Narcan, supportive staff, supportive communities, we're always trying to figure out what does it, what reaches people, when, how, and how can we duplicate that? How can we make that process shorter?
Sure.
How can we get there faster?
Yeah.
And we don't yet have the answer. So maybe in my second decade at the Jesus Center,
Exactly.
we'll come up with that.
Well, if you do, you will be the first, right? Because clearly it's a complex problem.
Yeah.
So there's so many things you just said there that I want to just explore. So one of them is this idea that, or the concept that a person needs to, quote, hit rock bottom, end quote, before they're willing to make the change in their life, right?
Yep.
And I think your words were, you can't accelerate the descent into rock bottom, right? But
it has not been my experience that we can do that.
Yeah, I understand that. But it does seem like through some of the policies that we just talked about, you can prolong it unnecessarily and actually cause more harm to the individual because you've removed the negative consequences of those actions. We talked about, when there's no longer a negative consequence to drug use and no longer a negative consequence to doing all the things associated with seeking drugs and getting drugs, then you prolong that descent into the rock bottom where someone might be motivated to change. What's your thought on that?
I agree. When I can remember being on Park Avenue at the Jesus Center when Prop 47, when some of those changes happened. And I can also, and I remember a little bit of excitement for some people, relief, but also this idea that, I sort of have a clean slate. And you would hear two versions of that story. Mm-hmm. People who were like, I've got a clean slate, here I go. And the people who are like, hey, I have a clean slate, whatever I've sort of been carrying around with me, wow, it feels like my load might have just gotten a little lighter.
Yeah.
And I think with the human experience, that does not always, I think we need a little bit of diversion, right? We need this idea that if you do this, then, there's going to be some things that come with that might not be good for you.
Right.
I think the other thing, though, that we lost with that and with some of the drug court changes is that we used to have people that had so much pride in graduating from drug court.
Correct.
And they would come in and they would say, I did it, and this is the best thing that ever happened to me. And when we removed some of those consequences, it made it so that fewer and fewer people took up that opportunity, which meant fewer and fewer people could celebrate something that they were really in need of. Mm-hmm. And that, again, was just so life-changing. I'll tell you, a few weeks ago, I was talking to somebody and they shared that they were just getting ready to finish up a drug court. And they said, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me.
Right.
And I wish there had not been that impact that took that opportunity away from people, because I think that the people that did make changes that struggled with that, it came through programs like drug court.
Yeah.
It really did. And
absolutely.
I think it's a bummer. It's a bummer.
Yeah, it is. And, that was one of the things that we saw early on in Prop 47, and one of the reasons we advocated that the voters not pass that when they did. And that experiment, people saw it because most recently there were some changes in the law to try to undo the negative consequences brought about by Proposition 47. But drug court, you're right, fantastic program, but it worked because they were left with a choice.
Yeah.
Negative consequence of going to jail, right? Or you do the hard work necessary through drug court to get clean and sober. And the hard work necessary was a better option than going to jail, right?
Yeah.
Once you remove the negative option, then people are going to take the pathway of least resistance, right? And they're not going to do the hard work. And you're so right. We've robbed a lot of people through, the people that wanted Proposition 47 to be the law of the land, were well-intended, I'm sure. Sure. Never thought that the consequences the unintended consequences would come to fruition. But we robbed people of an opportunity to work hard, struggle, achieve something great, and be better for it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the other point of that is that when changes like that were made, it was not just the homeless population that was impacted.
Absolutely, correct.
We normalized something for everybody.
Correct.
And I think that what happens is, when people are housed, they are more likely to have some support systems in place. They're going to be more likely to be able to be supported through those difficult decisions in that hard work.
Yeah.
But this part of the population, the homeless population, is really, they're just out there I mean, honestly, they're just trying to survive the day.
Sure.
They're trying to survive the week. And when we start asking them to contemplate, several months of treatment and a different life, they're thinking about things like the social isolation of that. They're thinking that, well, how can they possibly achieve something so big? And I think that there is a little bit of inequity in that.
Okay.
I think that it is absolutely more difficult for people who are experiencing homelessness to take up some of those offerings and experience a different life, because they're the only ones there holding the cards to make a decision.
Yeah.
They're least likely to have people cheering them on or supporting them, or really helping them to just really sort of analyze and to really determine, why is this the right decision for me, right?
Yeah.
Or their support group. I mean, I saw that myself. When you have people who are in addiction, who are struggling, it's a very natural thing to remove yourself or minimize yourselves from people or conversations that you can perceive as judgment.
Okay. And
you move towards acceptance. And most likely, you get acceptance from other people who have a similar lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
And so this is a circle of people who are tired of hearing about it from the people that love and care about them.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's another thing that sort of we see constantly in this population is there is nobody on the streets that is suffering from a lack of awareness of where they are.
Okay.
I think that they very much know that they are living in ways in places and with people that are not, maybe not always ideal.
Okay.
They're very clear that people who love and care about them most likely don't approve of their lifestyle. But some of the atrophy of those personal relationships makes it so that, sort of back to that rock bottom, right? This idea that exhausted, depleted family members say, I don't know what else I can do.
Right.
They're going to have to figure it out.
Right.
And then they're out there with other people who are also trying to figure it out. We lack these policies that can help them get there, right? Some of these changes that we've made. And, most recently in one of the very first ad hoc committee meetings here in the city of Chico, somebody said, the result of all of these kinds of things is that we're going to let people die with their rights on.
Okay.
And I just thought, gosh, it's so true.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we have some discomfort of forcing or compelling people into treatment.
Agreed.
The people who just so desperately need it.
Right.
And yet we equally rail against some of the efforts that are out there to get people into treatment that will change their life and improve so many of the struggles that we're talking about, not only personal, organizational, community, all of these things. I know that you see all the time that in absence of some of these other services, first responders are being asked to step in some of these voids, right? Yep. And it's even some elements of the new jail that you guys are designing.
That's correct.
Trying to figure out new ways to deal with old problems.
Yeah. Again, a lot, so much in there that I want to see. This is fantastic. We're going to run out of run out of time before we can cover all the topics. You talk about this whole, and I agree, we're going to let people die with their rights on is an interesting way to characterize that. And I think that is rooted in, as I said earlier, the deinstitutionalization of people with mental health issues back in the 60s. And, there were significant problems with that system. And now we've swung this other way where I can't envision anybody thinking that allowing people to languish on the streets in the conditions that they are living in is humane or something that we would want for any member of our society, right? And so there has to be...
I struggle with that. I mean, I'll be honest with you. When we had encampments in the city of Chico, like Comanche Creek, I have been doing this for long enough that perhaps people would think that it wouldn't personally affect me when I see some of these things. You know, we've been out in outreach and engagement. I've been through nearly all the encampments that are in the city of Chico. And I'll tell you, we are not supposed to let people live like that.
Right.
We are supposed to fight for people. We are supposed to do better. And I'll tell you, as I would drive past places like that, I would just ask myself, what would I do if there was somebody that like a personal family member that I loved and cared about that were out in these encampments that people are actively advocating for these spaces? And
yes, to keep it the way it is.
I can't get comfortable with that idea.
Yeah.
I really can't. I don't understand it. And I think, and it's really the reason that the Jesus Center has gotten involved in, you know, projects like Genesis, you know, the formerly the Pallet Shelter, or the, you know, some of the contributions that we're making now to the alternate site, is that we will work against the idea that that's okay.
Yeah.
We will help rebuild the narrative in people's minds that we encounter, that is all they are worthy or deserving of. I read something the other day that said that, you know, there's this idea that we all sort of have this tape recorder in our heads, and that when we have strong support systems, those tape recorders are playing to us, and when we're struggling, maybe like we heard old messages from coaches, or from teachers, or from our grandparents, like those are the sort of things that get prompted up first in our minds. When you don't have that kind of support, when people don't have the opportunity to engage and connect with teachers because they're struggling to get to school, or they drop out, or they're in the foster care system, they're struggling with addiction, they're struggling with mental health, we can probably imagine the tape recorder that starts to play in their head. And it's not supportive messages.
Sure.
And so a lot of the work that we end up trying to do to counter that is messages of hope. And our staff chose to engage in this work with some of the most complicated people that obviously are still living in public spaces and in the most condensed ways, to try to get them to hear, see, and experience that they can do something different.
Right.
And if maybe not today, we're just tucking a little note in their hearts, you know, or in their pockets, so that when they're sitting out there and they're contemplating what's going to come tomorrow or the next day, it's our hope that they go, what was that girl from the Jesus Center? Who was she? What was that all about? Why was she out here saying some things that maybe very few, if nobody, has ever said to me before?
Right.
Like, that's really what we do all the time. And I think in absence of that, I think that, you know, not only just from the Jesus Center, I just want to recognize there's a lot of other people in the community that also go out and try to have those conversations.
Sure.
If we give up on that, I think that it will be difficult to continue in this work.
Yeah.
Because we do all need that encouragement.
For sure.
We do need it.
So I want to bring that out a little bit more too, because you and I both deal with members of the community, and I think we also, from a personal level, can identify or appreciate the frustration that large segments of the community have with this population. This notion that, you know, just change, there's plenty of services out there, right? And we talked about this notion of being service resistant. And you said something that I really want to highlight, because it's a more nuanced and complex problem than just take advantage of the services. And I would begin by saying that, and I think you said that everybody who is in that position understands that they're in that position, and that the people who love them and care for them don't necessarily approve of that, right? Yeah. Would you say that's, just as a side note, would you say that's true even for the people suffering from significant mental health issues?
I think it's more, I think that it is less likely that, I don't think it's any less likely that the conversations are being had and the efforts are being made by the people in their life. But I think, again, based on their capacity, it's going to be the least likely that will be the thing in itself that would be able to get people help, right?
Yeah, and so
people who are sick are most often the least likely to know that they are sick.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that it's important to understand a bit of the journey. So is it fair to say that you have a person who everything's going great in their life, they got a job and a career and a house and a family, and they lose their job and the next day they're homeless? I mean, it doesn't typically go that way. There's usually this continual progression, right, of things that happen that ultimately get them into the position where they're out on the streets. And I can appreciate the fact that through whatever mechanism that got them there, and clearly there's some accountability on the part of the individuals there, right? Bad decisions that they've made along the way, resistance to the efforts of people who love and support them along the way. But you can certainly appreciate and understand, the family and a support network on one hand, trying to help somebody, and every single effort is thwarted by a resistance or a bad decision on the part of the loved one you're trying to help. And eventually, for your own sanity, for your own well-being, you have to say, I can't help you, right? Yeah. And off you go.
Sure.
But the thing that I think that you brought out, and I think it's really worthy of bringing out, is this idea that you get to a point in your life where you've fallen down so many times that the idea of standing up one more time is overwhelming and insurmountable. Right?
And just, I think, incredibly, scary, right?
Right.
Like I don't, sort of to your point, like, I've done this 11 times. It hasn't turned out well. I don't know that number 12 is really going to change anything. So I'm just in acceptance.
Right. Just this is my station in life. This is where I'll be forever, because I'm not capable of doing anything else. I think you and then you live in that, right? Yeah. And dwell in that. And I love the fact that you're trying to send in a counter message that maybe one day, and this whole idea, this notion of, if I can do one simple thing and be successful, then that might allow me to do a second simple thing that's successful. And pretty soon you start building on those kind of successes. Yeah. But I do think it comes back to this whole idea that if you resign yourself to this is the life that you have, and you're only capable of having this life, it becomes hard to break out of that if there's no catalyst to pushing you to try something different, like the consequences that we talked about.
Oh, absolutely. I always sort of think about it, like, I like to use this term discomfort because I think it is just so universal. I think we can all identify it. This idea that, most people don't start thinking about going to the gym or eating healthier until your pants get a little tight. This is not a unique, some of these things are not unique conditions of the homeless population. It's just who we are as humans, right? Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that, one of the other, yesterday we were having this conversation around this, developing a treatment center at the Jesus Center. And it turns out change is actually pretty scary, right? For
sure.
And so that's, in some cases, can kind of paralyze people.
Yep.
The other thing that we have heard over the years about change and movement through or treatment and services about addiction is just this idea that I will no longer be numb to some of the things that have gone on in my life, maybe interpersonally, from a family, and these sorts of things. And there's a certain numbness that I think people probably need in order to survive some of the life that we're talking about outside, right?
That would make complete sense.
Yeah. And I think that service resistant it could be one of the most asked questions that I get.
Okay.
Right? Like, what's the deal with the service resistant population? Obviously, we talked about it at all of the homeless ad hoc committee meetings. And one of the things I find really interesting is just the discomfort in the term service resistant.
Okay.
This idea that it is intended to be demeaning or disrespectful to people. And there was one of those homeless ad hoc committee meetings where somebody offered an alternative term, which was contaminated thinking.
Okay, I'm familiar with that concept, but yeah. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
and so it's this idea that we're trying to acknowledge that people who maybe lack the capacity to make good decisions are making some bad ones, perhaps unintentionally, right? And I will tell you that in that meeting and in subsequent conversations after, there was a fair amount of criticism of using that term also. And so I just, it's interesting to me that we cannot, as a community, feel comfortable talking about the people who are struggling to engage in services that could be life-changing for them. I think we have to talk about it. I think we have to get comfortable with the idea that the population exists. But I would just also caution that sometimes, and again, I have the benefit of the amount of time and the conversations and the people that we have been able to help over the years. Actually, I want to clarify that. The people that we have been able to help themselves
for sure. Yeah.
over the years, right? Because we don't own that. We don't own that work for people.
Yeah.
We create opportunity, but to your point, they come in and they do that hard work.
Yeah.
Just this idea that sometimes service resistance is just that day and that conversation and that time. But I really think that the portion of this population that the community is expressing frustration about are the ones who have now documented offering of shelter, right? And that really came about as the Warren settlement,
Correct.
The outreach and engagement efforts.
Right.
So sort of previously we had sort of some anecdotal, ways of saying we really believe that a lot of these people have been offered services. They're just not interested. Now, through the noticing efforts, we've started to see that when those notices go out, we say, hey, there's 20 people in this location. 14 of them have previously been offered shelter.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And so we've got these really documented cases, and it's really enforcing that it has not been a lack of effort on behalf of the city or service providers that are out there. It is just a lack of personal decisions on behalf of the people who are living in public spaces.
Okay.
And I think that, some of that people will say, there isn't something, the option that I want isn't yet available. Maybe that's a managed campground. Maybe that, it could be all sorts of things.
Sure.
But I think that for some of those folks, without having to be incredibly vulnerable in this little small window of time, I don't know that we actually always understand why it's a no, why they say, I don't need you or I'm not going, why they just pick up their tent and move someplace else instead of coming to those services. I think the community's frustration with that is warranted. I absolutely understand that. I think that service providers, we have some frustration too because we see how dire people's circumstances are.
Right.
We see some of these people. I mean, I have wandered upon people who are 2 days post hip replacement in a park, in a tent. And I think, what is going on here, right? And so I think we do need to figure out a way to get to those people. Some of that, it's through some of these discomforts, through some of these policy things. We have to get there.
Yeah.
Because they're not capable or willing, and I think the line is a little fuzzy between those two reasons.
For sure.
But we got to figure out a way to help people help themselves.
Agreed.
And we're doing it from a good place.
Yeah, right.
And I just want more people to see that.
Yeah.
But also, I would be amiss if I did not acknowledge that there are some folks out there who are, just really tied up in the criminal justice system,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And those are folks that we see and hear that they are, there's a lot of theft amongst the homeless community.
Yep.
There's a lot of crime amongst the homeless community. Yep. And there are some homeless people who say, you have to do something about some of these people, right?
Right.
And I think that there are some people who sort of aren't really warmed up to that idea, but it's a really complex population.
Of course.
There is just as much variety and experiences and expectations and frustration. I always love the people who come into Genesis who have stayed 6 or 8 months. You know, we have these community council meetings, and I was in this conversation one day with one of those folks, and they said, you got to do something about the homeless people that are coming in here.
Okay.
And I was like, I really sat with that for a moment.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit about that. And so I listened to his perspective. He's like, they come in here, you know, they're kind of coming and going all the time. They're making loud noises. They're making messes. And I said, what do you think you struggled with when you came here? And I just got the, oh, I see what you did there, you know,
Okay,
sort of
yeah,
pause
for sure,
and look.
for sure, yeah.
And then I said to him, I said, I think this might be more about your own growth and your own health that a program and service like this has created for you.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh.
Yeah.
Right? And
Right.
so I think that I think there's a lot of ways in which I can say the wrong thing, or people will feel like maybe I'm suffering from too much compassion or not enough compassion. But I just think that I think that I appreciate you acknowledging that I'm a balanced person on this. I feel like I have a pretty good read of when people need somebody to hear and to listen and to encourage. But I also recognize that tough love
There's a place
is still
for it.
love.
There's a place for
It's
it.
still love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have, during my tenure as sheriff, have tried to be very balanced and thoughtful in my approach to dealing with, you know, challenging situations. I've never found an extreme position, one side to the other, to be beneficial, or I think it's important always to try to understand both sides of the perspective and find the right way through it. I think it's interesting too, because, you know, we deal with this a lot in the criminal justice system, and this notion or idea that somehow the term service resistant is an offensive term.
Yeah.
And so we waste all of this time trying to find the least offensive term. And we stop focusing on actually solving the problem and finding ways to talk about a problem that might not offend somebody, right?
I agree.
It's stupid.
It's such a waste of time and energy that we don't disagree that it exists, but we're going to disagree about the way in which we're describing it or titling it. And it's
Exactly. And what's
tough.
interesting about that, and it kind of it goes to this, and I love the fact that you're pointing out that, you know, service resistance could be due to a lot of different factors that nobody understands, and it's not a permanent status. It's it's a fluid situation, and we all see that in our own lives. There are times when we're resistant to change or resistant to certain kinds of things, but factors change and we change as well. I love that because that does give hope. It also, I think, plays into another piece of this. And I had a pretty spirited argument with some representatives from the California Department of Healthcare Services not too long ago about this issue. And they seemed to be, when I talked about the dismal failure that California has had in responding to this particular problem, their go-to solution was, we just need to build more housing, right? And you talked about the fact that, that is one component of it. But my experience, and I'm interested in hearing what your experience is that there are certain people who are at a point in their life with either their addiction or their mental health problems or their ability to manage the day-to-day aspects of living in an apartment and paying the bills and doing all those kinds of they're just not there. They can't do that. And so you could put them into a house or you could put them into an apartment and in short order it would be trashed and they would be doing things that caused them to be evicted. There has to be some project. And I want to understand what your perspective is between this idea of just build a house and put them in it, right? As it pertains to where they're at in their life, and then the idea or the notion of low barrier housing, because I think that all gets kind of morphed in there together. Am I wrong?
Yeah. Well, I think that this idea of, housing first.
Okay, talk about that.
Housing first is this idea. A gentleman, we really started hearing about it here locally. There was a gentleman in Utah by the name of Lloyd Pendleton, and he actually came to Chico.
Okay, I think I think I went to a
yeah, it was
presentation.
over at the
Southside Community Center.
Okay.
No?
Maybe
Okay.
he spoke there too. In Chico, he did a presentation just a couple of blocks from the Jesus Center.
Okay.
At a private residence, but just this idea that the state of Utah had some success in, instead of saying to people, "Hey, get clean, get sober, and then we'll give you a house," instead they put a lot of effort into this idea of that's not really manageable for people, right?
Okay.
Like temptation.
Agreed.
There is no lack of it on the streets, right?
For sure.
So what they really moved to was this idea that instead of getting people clean and sober and then giving them a house, that we gave them a house and then they would be more likely, or it would reduce their barriers to getting clean and sober. And so we saw that really get traction. Then the federal government got really excited about that. And the federal government, where they had previously supported transitional housing, they moved, and eventually, and this was really early on in my time at the Jesus Center, and we saw some of our local service providers that had been providing transitional housing, it nearly, this shift in funding, it nearly closed them up some very critical housing programs for families.
Okay.
And so the shift happened, and then in order to apply for or to utilize grant dollars, they started to say you had to adhere to housing first practices, which the one that we've talked about is the sobriety piece. Mm-hmm. But there's some other ones in there. And one of the other ones in there is that you cannot require any services. And this is the one that I really struggle with. And I struggle with it out at Genesis.
Okay.
And why I say things like, I think it's good to try to meet people where they are. I think it's bad to feel comfortable leaving them there. And this idea that we don't have to require any services is this, like that's the difference. And when you, we talk all the time, case management is where the magic happens. Case management is where somebody sits down and engages, shares what has happened to them, right? We are, I think there's a lot of people hearing this term trauma informed and don't really know what that means. And they might think that that's being careful or soft, but what it really is a shift in the way you deliver services and have conversations, where we used to say, man, what is wrong with that guy? And instead acknowledge this idea that I wonder what happened to that person, right? Yeah. And so when you shift to a trauma informed model, now through those services, you can learn about that. You can hear what happened, and you can start to put some pieces together that will heal some of those things. You hear some really dark, really difficult, very traumatic things that people have experienced, but it gives you a starting point. Mm-hmm. And then it's rebuilding support, right? Yeah. So now this case manager is hearing those things, and they are trained. When somebody shares something in their mind, they've got this list of this could be a good thing for this person. Now I know, let me get them to this referral source. Let's get that taken care of. And the whole idea is through those meetings that you're helping to lighten the load. Mm-hmm. You're helping them to, like you said, this idea that, I can do this. Yeah. This is not, very few times are people doing things that people have not done before, right? And been able to have a different life. But it turns out they don't actually know that some of those options are available. That's the magic of the service piece. Housing First says you can't do that. Yeah. Right? And so at Genesis, we've got these people who are coming into services. They do not have a maximum length of stay, right? Motivation is minimized as a result. And then you can't do services. You can't ask them to do case management. In these housing first practices, what often happens, people get into housing. They don't have to have any follow-up services. They don't have to do this. And I'll tell you, probably what we hear the most is that they start letting other people come stay with them.
Absolutely.
The social isolation.
Yeah.
I wonder what the people out there are doing.
Yeah.
Or there's the alternate, which is, God, I have a house now, and I'm going to leave them out there. Those were my people. Those were my buddy. Those are the people we struggled with. And so they need help. They need the services. And I will continue to tell people, I have no problems meeting people where they are, but I really struggle with leaving them there. And I think that there are going to be some shifts that are coming down through the federal government that I think that there is some idea or some energy being spent about, is that continuing to be the right thing? I don't support the absence of services for people.
So there's a couple things that I want to highlight from what you just said. Fantastic stuff. One of them is, again, when I hear people just say there's not enough housing, you're right. It lacks that other piece, which is, and I fully understand and appreciate the fact, in particular with regard to sobriety, and probably with even addressing mental illness, it's not an event; it's a process.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And in any process, there are steps forward and there's steps back.
Yes.
And I completely appreciate that you have to be accommodating of the difficulties, challenges, and temporary failures that any process entails. So housing first isn't just about we need more houses. Mm-hmm. Housing first is you need housing coupled with the kinds of services that are going to help them move to that very next level.
Absolutely.
Because what I hear them say is, well, we'll just build more houses, and then you put them in a situation that they are clearly not prepared to maintain, right?
That's right.
Because it takes skill, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a recipe. You're setting them up for failure. You're setting them up for disaster. And it's also, I think, a way for them to not acknowledge the other piece of this, which is this is hard work. And it's okay to expect people to struggle and do hard work as long as that hard work is moving them towards a better existence for them and the impact on the community. And this idea that we shouldn't have consequences, right? Because I'm going to tell you, there's times when the alternative housing or the housing first coupled with mandatory services is jail, right? That does happen from time to time, right?
Yep. Yep.
And the harder, the more barriers they put in that for people who are unwilling to do that, I think we see that play out on our streets all the time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Genesis.
Yeah.
Formerly known as the Pallet Shelter, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I want you to talk a little bit about that, because that became a big part of the city's response to the Warren decision, right?
Yeah, huge piece.
Yeah, huge piece. So explain what that is and how you get there, and a little tell us about that.
Yeah, so on January 1st of 2022, I became the executive director of the Jesus Center. And then 21 days later,
Okay.
I had my board convened and we were talking about becoming the contracted provider out there.
Yeah.
And, when we first started that, it was, we have 177 units out there.
Okay.
The single largest site in the country for about the first 3 years of our operations out there.
Okay.
Yes.
All
yeah.
right.
So I was going to start small
Yeah.
in my first 3 weeks at
Go
the
for
Jesus
it.
Center.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so it's a huge part of it. And I think that, it's not my intention to be critical. I often remind my team and my staff and our supporters and folks around the community that, most of the people left here were handed a playbook, and we said, all right, here's what we're giving you. Do the best you can.
Yeah.
And I think that there was a lot of concerns. I mean, there was some very robust conversation just amongst our board members of, is this something we want to get into? What does this really look like? Does this align with the mission of what we do in our other programs and services? And ultimately we said, the Jesus Center has an incredible amount of experience. We're getting ready to celebrate our 45th year. And this idea that I've touched on before is like, we're not yet ready to give up on people. And we want to do it in a very dignity forward way. We want to continue to, my program director, Shelley Watson, who is entering her 17th year at the Jesus Center, is always saying, we are planting seeds for people. And the idea that we could do this through outreach and engagement, and then we could get people in. One of the things we have working against us out there is that there is no length of stay. There is no requirement to enter any kind of services. So we have to rely on things like motivational interviewing. We have to get creative. We have to help people to see and believe that they can be and do something different. There's a good part of that population that's at Genesis that is struggling with addiction. A good part that has mental health disorder, and another part of them that has those co-occurring disorders.
Of course.
So our staff is navigating through some of those things. A huge portion of the population that goes out to Genesis are also people that have experienced what we refer to as chronic homelessness, meaning they've been on the streets a long time. All of those things take more time to unpack for people, right? And so this idea that that site was developed with no length of stay, I think that could have been done differently. I think that really that's probably ideally an 18-month program for people. Again, been on the streets a long time, going to take a little bit longer to unwind some of those behaviors, some of those struggles that they're having. And I'm super encouraged because in the last 2 months, we have had 13 people at Genesis move out into permanent housing.
Wow.
So what's interesting about that is that what we have done is exactly what I've described. Those people have chosen to services. Right? They have chosen. We have been able to couple that with some of the housing development that's gone on. Specifically, in this case, it was Oleander that was part of a grant, the Encampment Resolution Funding Grant that the city of Chico pursued. So we have used this time. Those folks have engaged. They've got all of their ducks in a row. And now they have moved from that space into permanent housing. And they are the best suited to keep those keys that they have worked for. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that at Genesis, and we've had other people that have gotten jobs that have gone out on their own and found housing. We have people that moved into Genesis when it first opened, got a job, moved out, and are now back working for me out there. And so it's also an interesting contribution because it's just a reminder to all the people out there that might be struggling. Wow, like that person got a job. That person now works here and is at the Jesus Center. Like, what's going on here today,
Yeah.
And so Genesis has some struggles. I think that we have conversations right now about what Genesis looks like in a post-Warren era. And those are some of the things, that my staff, we are currently contemplating about what does it look like? What is the right program? What's the right engagement? Despite my efforts to get quarterly case management check-ins, even from people that are living out there, that is not something during this current Warren era that had support from the parties that need to support that, right?
Yeah,
everything we do out there requires conversation and, agreeance among both the plaintiffs, the defendants, and then, of course, the federal magistrate overseeing the Warren case.
So the length of stay issue and the prohibition against some kind of mandatory services is part of the decision, right?
It is.
That's why those are in place. But what I'm hearing from you is that in a post-Warren decision world, implementing some length of stay and some requirement that you engage in services would probably increase the likelihood of successful outcomes.
That is my opinion.
Okay.
Correct.
And you've got some years in the business to support the opinion, right?
Well, I just think, again, this idea, we are all suffering from similar human conditions, right? And
exactly.
so if my mortgage bill came and it didn't have a due date,
You're right.
I can think of some other great things I'd like to do.
For sure.
Now, some people might think that's demeaning for somebody who's struggling with trauma or substance use or has a mental health disorder. But there again, that's why those services, that's
Right.
why that engagement's so important, so that we have the opportunity to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And I think that we've got some folks out there whose long-term plan is they're going to stay till they can't stay anymore.
Yeah.
And I think there's frustration from the community. And again, we share it, we see it.
Yeah.
My hope is that they are watching people move in and move on.
Right.
And that's something that they would want to pursue for themselves. And some people it has, and other people it hasn't.
Yeah. Does the facility operate at full capacity all the time?
Right now, we generally have anywhere between, I would say, 9 and 12 available units.
Okay.
Right now, we have significantly more because we get to celebrate the last 2 months. A lot of folks moving out.
Yeah.
We have typical, operational reasons. People failing inspections,
Okay.
people failing to return. If people leave for more than 72 hours and don't check in, we consider that unit abandoned, and we clean it and make it available for somebody else to come in.
Right. So what do you think the biggest reason for the people who are living in the alternative site or just out in public spaces, why they don't seek the opportunity to live in the facility?
Yeah, so there is, in the settlement agreement,
Yeah.
there is a process by which people are assessed for shelter and offered particular shelters.
Okay.
Some of those things are the number of pets that they have.
Right.
Some of them if they are partnered. So
Okay.
if we go to an encampment and 2 people are sharing a tent and encampment, it's very evident that they are cohabitating in a space.
Okay.
Then the settlement agreement requires that we create a sheltering alternative that mimics that.
Okay, so they have to live together.
That's correct. We
Got it.
can't separate them.
Okay.
The other pieces of that are if people are registered sex offenders.
I understand.
Because of our proximity to the fairgrounds where there are schools,
Yep.
we are unable to host registered sex offenders.
I understand.
Because of the sheltering component, we are also unable to house registered arsonists for the obvious, that's an
Yeah.
obvious risk mitigation effort.
Yeah.
And so and then of course the other one are folks that have mental health issues that shelter would not be a good fit for them.
Okay.
And I'll tell you that, again, we have the benefit of having a lot of experience with most of the people, not all of them,
Yeah,
but most
okay.
of the people that are out experiencing homelessness in our community. And we have tried many times feeling like, hey, a stable environment where there's facilities, shower, laundry, meals, behavioral health comes on site out at Genesis, the Department of Employment and Social Services, their eligibility and their housing navigators, they're all out there.
Yeah.
And so we have many times erred on the side of let's bring this person into Genesis and see if that can be the thing that helps them.
Yeah.
Get them more proximate to services, right?
Okay.
Instead of them having to figure out how to get to the behavioral health clinician, we've got the clinician coming out to them,
Yeah.
right? Just, again, really trying to line up all of those things. And we've had some people that's worked for, and then we've had other people that we have tried at that site, and for a variety of reasons, that doesn't end up being a proper placement. So we've had to update them and put them out at the alternate site. When that happens, Director Kennelly and I had conversations, and we sort of created this thing where we would say, hey, we had this person. We want you to know that we are now updating them. They're going to be out at the alternate site, because for him, that cues up some of his mobile crisis teams
Right.
to be able to go out now and continue to attempt to engage that person in those services
Yeah.
now just at that new location, so that they don't get lost and slip through the cracks. We also just have to say that people continue to have to accept those services,
Right.
which is not a new thing,
Yeah.
but and so that's really out at Genesis. That's mostly what goes on out there.
Sure. So I think before there's so many things I think we could probably spend hours talking about this topic, and it is such a complex topic that it deserves this kind of in-depth conversation. But I have to make the episodes consumable in a certain amount of time. So before we wrap this up, though, I want you to tell me about your most notable or your favorite success story. Do you have one?
Oh gosh, it's so interesting. When you say that, I just have to tell you, I just have like this. I have like this burst of images that just shoots through my mind.
Of different people, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that goes to the quantity. There's been a lot of success.
Yeah. I mean, it just like it. So many people.
Okay.
So many people that have been people that I probably thought were least likely to make that list.
Yeah.
Lots of people who have called me every name and some I'd actually never heard before some of those interactions.
Okay.
Some people that I continue to be connected with now. Some of those people that are working for me now.
Yeah.
We have an incredible number of people at the Jesus Center who have lived experience.
Okay.
Gosh, there's, I mean, it's a good problem to have that I have so many.
Yeah, that you can't pick one.
I have, I think about the conversations that we have with people after they have sort of got their lives back together, right?
Right.
I remember having conversations with this one person, and they were like, the goal is to get on Social Security.
Okay.
And then they started volunteering because we have this, this reciprocity component at the Jesus Center.
Okay.
And all of a sudden what they learned from that was, hey, I'm pretty good at things.
Okay.
I got a lot in me.
Yeah.
I've got a lot to give. And that person is just such an incredible mom, an incredible community member, I think a thoughtful friend, and a very proud homeowner.
That's fantastic.
Today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I love that story. I love, I also, like, in full disclosure, I tend to really be drawn to spicy people.
Okay.
I love that. I love spunky people.
Okay.
I love, because I think to myself, if you still have, that's fire.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna get in there and I'm just gonna redirect it, right?
Exactly.
So I have this one other person that I laugh with every time I have an opportunity to see them, and they always say to me, "Girl, why did you let me wear that eyeshadow?" And again, another person now that's working, housed, going to school. I have another one that just a few weeks ago I encountered. I was walking down to Market and gonna go check on our Jesus Center farm booth.
Okay.
And I got stopped by this person that I had spent countless hours really corralling, probably more than anything. And this particular person is probably easily twice my size.
Okay.
And always felt like they needed to fight something or somebody for me. And so I was like, oh gosh. But that person stopped me and said, I've been sober for 3 years. I'm a wildcat, because they had just been accepted into Chico State.
Really? Okay.
And
all right, cool.
Yeah, like I just, there's so many just really awesome, cool stories. And I think that there was likely a point in each of those relationships where I always hoped that they didn't see that I maybe was a bit concerned they were actually going to be able to do this.
For sure.
And I love that they proved me wrong in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them. And then I think, those are really extreme cases. I think there's a lot of places in between where we talk to people out in an encampment and they came in and they stayed a night.
Yeah.
They came in and they stayed 3 nights. And I think to myself, they have not given up. There's still hope in there.
Yeah.
And we look a lot at this idea, this model of the stages of change, because it really helps remind us when we're struggling with hope, maybe, that relapse is part of it. Mm-hmm. And that relapse is not always about, drugs and alcohol. It's about all of the things that we're trying to change in our life. So when there's little small things, I had a gal that came to one of the very first city council meetings that said, I have been trying to find that Amber and I can't find her. And I was sitting 4 feet away from her in the chair in the chambers. And so when she got done speaking and she left, I walked out and I said, hey, I'm Amber. And she went, oh, you're Amber. And I said, yeah. And so that's a person who has come into services and gotten shelter. And so I think that success looks like a lot of things.
Absolutely. And success is a matter of degree, and small successes turn into bigger successes. And I think, that's one of the things that I think is important. I love the fact that we kind of end on that, because for all of the members of the community, for ourselves included, that get frustrated with this problem, if you can look to the fact that there are successes, it helps you, I think, deal with the frustration and maybe put it in a better or different perspective. So I think that's a cool thing.
I think it does. I mean, I'll tell you the other side of that we often struggle with. We hear this all the time. We need to hear more good. We need to know more good.
Sure.
And I understand. I think one of the things that we end up having conversations with people about also is nobody else owns your success.
Right.
Like, you get to carry that and you get to know. And I think that sometimes, we struggle a little bit because we had some scenarios early on in my time at the Jesus Center where if you talk about some of that stuff really publicly, we had a couple of folks that became as like that guy from the Jesus Center or that girl from the Jesus Center. And when they experienced some relapse, people went, oh, you're that girl from the Jesus Center.
Right.
You're that guy. And we really want to help them sort of not carry that label once they get past it.
Sure.
And so it's something that we know and we understand, and it absolutely sustains us, for sure.
Right.
I just think we need to figure out a better way to be able to help the community see those things without risking, putting some of that pressure on people.
100%. That makes complete. Yeah, it makes complete.
So I don't know how we do it, but I agree.
I get that. It's hard, but
I agree. It needs to get done. People can always volunteer with us.
That's true. Exactly.
People can always come out and get up close and personal.
Yeah. See it firsthand.
It's out there. It's alive and well. And I am grateful for people's support. I think I am humbled by people's trust and the relationships that we have in this community. And I also love hard conversations. I love hearing and sitting with people who don't understand, who are feeling frustrated, so that I can help them to see some of these things that some people just aren't comfortable. They don't feel safe. They don't feel equipped.
Yeah.
And I love to be able to offer all sorts of things and be the benefactor of all sorts of things in this capacity. But this hard work, I often tell my staff, I get to be in the fancy podcasts with the famous people. I get to, be in the paper or on the news. I get the credit. I also get the criticism, but I want to acknowledge that we have a lot of people who work really hard, who show up every day and do this work so that our entire community can benefit, right?
Sure.
We've got that initial benefit, and then we've got that secondary, and they're really, really good people. Yeah. Really good people.
Well, on that note, I'll say, first I want to thank you, as well as all of the people that you just mentioned, for doing that hard work. I also want to thank you for coming on the podcast and being willing to talk about all of these things. I'm hoping that the people who listen to this podcast found it informative, and will answer some of the questions that I've been getting in terms of emails about doing this kind of podcast. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really do
I
appreciate it. Yeah.
Very much.
All right, so that concludes this episode of the Sheriff's Mic. And as I said, I really hope that you all find this to be of value and informative and interesting. It is a complex topic. I know that we didn't scratch the surface of many of the issues that we're dealing with, and perhaps in the future we'll do some follow-up podcasts on this particular topic. But at any rate, until then, thank you. I hope that you will like, share, and follow the podcast so we can get more people listening to what's going on in our community with regard to public safety. But until then, stay informed, stay safe, and as always, you're clear to talk.
Excellent.
Good?
Good.
All right. That was good.